If even failure has to take a lesson, then NATO's Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg will be the ideal teacher. This man, who unfortunately leads one of the biggest military alliances in the world, is the epitome of someone who makes blunders and keeps repeating them. No, it's not an exaggeration. Ever since he took the position of NATO's head, the diplomatic failures and catastrophic military aggressions of the West have intensified. But after a very long time, finally, we have some good news. It is a sign of relief for the world in general and Russia in particular, given the fact that he is gone. Hello and welcome to TFIGlobal, the foreign affairs and geopolitical analysis arm of the TFI Media Group. I'm your host, Piyush. Let's begin. After a newspaper suggested a further extension was in the works, an alliance spokeswoman confirmed that NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg's term will conclude as scheduled in October. Oana Lungescu said on 11th February that Stoltenberg's term has been extended 3 times for a total of nearly 9 years. Stoltenberg's term expires in October of this year and he has no intention of asking for any extension of his mandate. Prior to this, Weltam Zontek claimed that Stoltenberg's tenure would be renewed as NATO worked to maintain stability throughout the Ukrainian conflict. The tenure of Stoltenberg was extended in 2017. Prior to leading NATO, he served as the Prime Minister of Norway from 2000 to 2001 and again from 2005 to 2013. He has also served as Minister of Finance and Energy. Alliance members, according to Welt, intended to give Stoltenberg the chance to preside over Group's 75th anniversary summit in Washington in April 2024. In addition, it stated that he would be qualified to succeed David Malpass as president of the World Bank when he retires at about the same time. Nobody has been chosen to follow Stoltenberg, although Welt noted that Pedro Sanchez, the Prime Minister of Spain, and Ben Wallace, the Secretary of Defense of the United Kingdom, are 2 of the frontrunners. Now, Jens Stoltenberg has been the Secretary General from 2014 till the time his term ends in October this year. His tenure has been marked by unprecedented and unforeseeable incidents in the fluctuating realm of geopolitics. In fact, Stoltenberg's very appointment took place soon after the annexation of Crimea by Russia. As Stoltenberg took the leadership role in one of the biggest military alliances in the world, he faced countless challenges over the years. His tenure is marked by various unpredictable developments. But as Stoltenberg's tenure comes to an end, it's time to look at his achievements, or should we say, are there any? Stoltenberg had a horrible track record. He is infamous for not upholding his pledges and backstabbing NATO's partners. He did this with Israel. In June 2016, Stoltenberg stated that since Israel had been an active alliance member for 20 years and there was a need to intensify collaboration with the country. However, in 2018, Stoltenberg betrayed Israel. He said that NATO would not defend Jerusalem from an Iranian attack. NATO, according to Stoltenberg, is not involved in regional wars or efforts to bring about peace in the Middle East. It must be noted that Stoltenberg very cunningly reversed his policy on Jerusalem. Apart from turning his back on Israel, Stoltenberg also had a troubled relationship with former US President Donald Trump. While Donald Trump often emphasized the failures of NATO, including criticizing member states' low contribution to bloc's budget despite being mandated to donate 2% of their GDP to the bloc's defense budget, Stoltenberg misconstrued Trump's claim as an attack on NATO. On one occasion, Stoltenberg even insinuated that Trump was trying to divide NATO when all Trump was trying to do is reform the internal structures and overall organization of the incompetent military alliance. While Stoltenberg's rocky relationship with Trump continued, he kept repeating the same blunders which cost the allies of NATO their sovereignty and territorial integrity. This happened with Georgia. In 2008, at the Bucharest summit, NATO stated that Georgia, along with its neighbor Ukraine, would become members of the bloc. The same year, Georgia was annexed by Russia. 11 years later, in 2019, the NATO Secretary-General, who was on a visit to Tbilisi, reiterated a decade-old promise to the bloc. He emphasized that Georgia would certainly become a member of NATO in future, despite knowing full well that his statement will be taken as a threat by Russia and can further damage the political, diplomatic, and economic interests of Georgia. Stoltenberg put the security and stability of Georgia in jeopardy. The same thing happened with Ukraine, which is now under persistent military onslaughts of Moscow. Had Stoltenberg remained neutral and not provoked Russia, Georgia and Ukraine would not have been overrun by Russia. Since Putin is not an advocate of military aggression, there were many opportunities for Ukraine and Georgia to peacefully resolve their diplomatic and military disputes with Russia. But Stoltenberg didn't learn anything from his past mistakes. His incompetent policies kept exposing the shallow promises and nefarious intentions of NATO. The same NATO which rallies around the world always calling for peace and stability created a ruckus for Ukraine and Georgia. Ironically, NATO did not see any violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria when Turkey invaded some of its territories and perpetrated war crimes in the war-torn nation. In fact, in 2019, Stoltenberg defended Turkey's military aggression in Syria. This was extremely outrageous on part of NATO's Secretary-General, given the fact that even its member states including France and Belgium condemned Ankara's atrocious actions in Syria. It was extremely unfortunate that despite repeated pleas from the bloc's member countries, Stoltenberg was adamant in his controversial stance on Erdogan's brutalities in Damascus. He further also accused Iran without any evidence that it supported various terrorist organizations and alleged that Tehran was actively involved in perpetrating violence and provocations in the international arena. Whereas all Iran, which has been the target of many diplomatic and military attacks by the US, was endeavoring to accomplish is the strengthening of its security and development of its nuclear program. Tehran knows that in order to survive and thrive in this unfairly hostile geopolitical order, which is dominated by the US and Europe, access to nuclear weapons is indispensable. However, the hypocritical Stoltenberg, who dances on the whims and wishes of Washington and Brussels, believes that Tehran's access to nuclear arms can disrupt the international order, despite the US being the most cunning player on the global stage given its invasion of Iraq and crimes against humanity in Vietnam. The NATO Secretary-General is under the illusion that Iran is the one which is a threat. This speaks volumes about the lack of practicality and incapability of Stoltenberg. But the most popular episode of geopolitics for which Stoltenberg will be remembered are his policy, stance, and actions on the Russo-Ukraine war. It is difficult to determine where to start here, but the entire intensification of conflict between Kiev and Moscow started in November 2021. Vladimir Putin gently emphasized that an expansion of NATO's presence in Ukraine, especially the deployment of any long-range missiles capable of striking Russia, would be taken as a direct threat by Moscow. Putin also warned that NATO's missile defense systems, which it planned to deploy in Ukraine, can be converted into launchers of high-capacity cruise missiles. The Russian president repeatedly called on Stoltenberg to prevent any further expansion of NATO eastward and stop the deployment of weapon systems in close vicinity to Moscow's territory. However, Stoltenberg, who earlier misconstrued the assertions of Donald Trump, did the same with Vladimir Putin. The Secretary-General brushed aside the genuine fears of Russia as baseless threats and in turn indirectly threatened Putin. He said, "Russia has no veto, Russia has no say, and Russia has no right to establish a sphere of influence to try to control their neighbors." In addition to Zelensky, Sanna Marin and Ulf Kristersson too were the victims of Stoltenberg's ineffectiveness. NATO's head has been unsuccessful in persuading Turkey in granting ascension of membership to Helsinki and Stockholm. Stoltenberg's diplomatic and foreign policy clearly crumbles in face of unreasonable demands of Erdogan. Therefore, these various developments, which have tremendous repercussions on the geopolitical order, perfectly demonstrate why Stoltenberg's departure from NATO is in the best interest of the military bloc. The US and Europe now have a chance to appoint someone as the head of NATO who is sensitive, cautious, and sincere regarding the fluctuating circumstances of geopolitics. With the exit of Jens Stoltenberg, a broken NATO looks at a better future.